Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Ledger. This is your host Mol Sayed, and I'm back once again on your weekly rendezvous from Paris. 2022 was a big moment for Ethereum. The long-awaited Merge event ended up finally taking place on September 15th, shifting Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake consensus and significantly reducing its energy consumption along the way. A massive step forward towards Ethereum 2.0. But there is still somewhat of a long road ahead of, Ethereum updates and implementations, including the Surge, the Verge, the Purge, and the Splurge. Sounds like a 90s rap song, but it isn't. This is what it's going to take for Ethereum to scale and be ready for mass adoption. Starting with the imminent Shanghai fork, the protocol's first major update since the merge, which will enable validators to withdraw ETH staked as far back as December 2020, when the Beacon chain was first launched, and obviously lower gas costs for Ethereum developers as well. But the question we want to be asking ourselves is, what is it going to actually change? What are the challenges that lie ahead, and will Ethereum be finally able to preserve its blockchain trilemma and scale? That's what we're going to be exploring today with our guests. Today we have Charles Guillemet, Ledger CDO, back on the show, and we're pleased to be joined by Marc Zeller, founder of Aave-Chan initiative. Gentlemen, glad to have you on the show. How are you feeling today?
Pretty good. And thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, I'm good also. Plenty of exciting news these days. Like, part of the team is at East Denver, and the mood is good. These days, people are focused on building, so this is great. And very happy to do the podcast with Marc. It's always a pleasure to debate these things with him.
Yeah, I'm very excited as well. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show and kind of deep dive into technical topics. So, let's start with Ethereum 2.0. I know that the concept has been evolving a lot in the past few years and has been also covered extensively, but I'd love us to set the table for those uninitiated. Could you give us a quick rundown of what those Ethereum upgrades are all about and what they aim to accomplish? Marc, maybe you can start.
Sure. You want the short version or the real version?
I want the version that you want to give.
Yeah. So Ethereum 2.0, or the transition from Ethereum proof of work to Ethereum proof of stake, was definitely a shit show in the Ethereum history. It was supposed to happen in the next 2 months for the past 7 years. My first Ethereum conference, my first DevCon was DevCon Shanghai in 2016. So DevCon 2, and it was for sure about to be released in 2017. As we can, as we, a few years down the line, we can realize that was a bit far from the truth. And basically everything changed since the early days of 2015-16, because basically Ethereum has been more ambitious with their way to organize proof of stake. The vision about proof of stake is completely different now. The technicalities of the implementation has been completely changed. And basically what we can say is that since the launch of the Beacon chain in December 2020, Ethereum is a proof of chain blockchain. But it was not the consensus layer. The consensus was still on proof of work until the merge that happened, as you said, in October 2022. Yes, October 2022, and it is expected that in April 2023, let's see what happened, because with Ethereum deadlines are a bit fuzzy. You will have the activation of the Shanghai fork and the ability to deposit, stake, and unstake on Ethereum, and that will be basically the minimum valuable Ethereum 2.0 finish, phase 1 finish. But there's still a lot of other things on the roadmap for Ethereum, and I think we're going to discuss that.
No, what I was going to say, Charles, is maybe you can even take a couple of steps back and talk about why this whole Ethereum 2.0 project came to life in the first place. and what that transition from proof of work to proof of stake, along with the variety of different upgrades that are being implemented, aim to achieve in the long term?
Yeah, I think we were talking about upgrading the chain for a long time, like at the beginning of Ethereum, that was already the plan. But I think the term of Ethereum 2 was more used in 2018. And at this time, Ethereum had huge scalability issues, like transaction cost was very, very high. Like if you wanted to do anything simple, it cost $50. So it was not usable anymore. And thus that was important for the Ethereum community to design a plan. And if I remember correctly, there was a couple of different ideas on the roadmap at this time. I remember the first one was to move signatures to BLS from SecP 256K1 to BLS. This one has been a little bit abandoned. I think it's a shame because BLS is far better than SecP. We are going to use BLS for the validator, but for the consensus and the signatures of transaction, probably it's at least delayed. So that was the first thing. The second one was changing the EVM language to EWASM. I think this one has been abandoned as well.
yeah. That was a shit show as well.
Yeah, and the last thing was really about scalability. And at this time, there were two main options for solving the scalability challenge. The first one was sharding, and it was also one of the big motivation to move to proof of stake because if you do sharding, staying in proof of work is not really possible. At least we don't know any solution to that right now. And the second option was layer 2. And there's two options have been worked in parallel since 2018. And what the time told us is that the L2 option is probably a better option. And sharding has not been completely abandoned yet, but I think that will be the case.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, like to see all of like these different implementations to try and solve scalability. But scalability isn't, I would say, the whole objective here. Like if you think about like the blockchain trilemma, and I assume a lot of our listeners probably heard that term before, but it might be useful for us to kind of explain what that trilemma is all about, and that I would say tension and relationships between scalability, security, and decentralization. Because in my opinion, that's really where most blockchain projects are trying to put the maximum amount of resources in order to solve that perfect equation.
Yes, definitely. When we use a blockchain, we want permissionless consensus. That means what happens on chain must be censorship resistant. You don't have to ask the permission to anyone to do your transaction. And the best way to maintain this censorship resistance and this permissionless property is decentralization. So decentralization is really, really important. If you give away decentralization, I think this ecosystem has no purpose anymore. Mm-hmm. The second one is to be secure. Of course, if you can't trust the system, again, there was no point. And finally, there is the scalability aspect, at least in terms of bandwidth, number of transactions. And I think right now, scalability is the adjustment variable. I mean, we don't want to compromise on security, of course. And also, we don't really want to compromise on decentralization. Otherwise, there was no point of doing this. So we are in a point where we have blockchain who are quite good in terms of security, quite good in terms of decentralization. And again, it depends on which blockchain. And now we want to increase the scalability for blockchain without compromising too much the two first property. This is a difficult tension because it's difficult to have the three properties completely fulfilled. So it's always a matter of trade-off, and I think the big challenge to solve is to increase scalability while not compromising too much on decentralization and the same on security.
I'd say that probably is the source of the whole project, right? Like trying to find a better solution to that blockchain trilemma. And Marc, the merge was one of the most anticipated Ethereum events of the past few years, to be fair. And everyone was like waiting for that event in September of last year, the transition to proof of stake and obviously being able to stake your ETH and gain rewards. Do you think that actually changed much since that implementation? Like, did it actually change much for the Ethereum ecosystem since the merge of last year, or do you think the biggest changes are yet to come?
I think it is definitely like a paradigm shift. Alongside, I will link that upgrade with EIP 1559, which introduced a burning mechanism, and it's quite important as well for the tokenomics or the economics of Ethereum as a whole, because when you associate basically what happened in the merge is that proof of work was dropped completely on the Ethereum blockchain and completely replaced by what was the Bitcoin chain. So it's not a new chain. It's not something new that happened in the merge. It's just that proof of work was deprecated and the Bitcoin chain that was already there since December 2020 became the new canon way to finalize block. So it's very important to understand because there were like quite a few misunderstandings at the time. It was not changing the engine of the plane while you are in mid-air, as we could read, as we saw in social media. It's that the plane already have two engines working perfectly for the past 2 years for one engine, the new one, and 7 years for the other ones. And we just cut one and just focus on the new one. So that's basically what happened. And in terms of impact for the tokenomics, we don't have the block rewards anymore in the sense of proof of work. We only have the activity rewards and the block proposition rewards for proof of stake, and the burn has been constantly on average higher than the emission on Ethereum. So you now have an asset that pays for its own security through actual economic activity, transaction fee, and is deflationary in terms of supply. And that's brand new. It's the first crypto asset, like the first blockchain, that is economically sustainable, that doesn't rely on any kind of subsidy. Because I want to remind everybody that Bitcoin is the most secure blockchain in the world, but Bitcoin relies on subsidy. Because the transaction fee, the actual economic activity is not enough at this point to sustain the Bitcoin ecosystem, or at least the current hash rate.
Yeah, maybe in terms of impact, so it's an interesting one. There was a side impact which is quite interesting. Like the GPU market has been impacted by this because like a big part of the GPU market was for miners on Ethereum, and miners on Ethereum were using GPU for that. And when you stop proof of work on Ethereum, that means that there's a GPU are not bought for this purpose anymore. So this is less tension on this market. This one is quite interesting.
Now the gamers are happy.
Yeah, and gamers should be happy, definitely. And if you go back to the blockchain trilemma, in terms of security, I would argue that we lost a little bit of security if you compare to proof of work and especially to Bitcoin. But this is to be debated at the end. And at the end, it's difficult to know, and only time will tell if it's secure enough at the least. In terms of scalability, it didn't really change anything for now because this was not the point. This is a prerequisite to implement more scalability solution after. But for now, there was no real change in this area. But in terms of decentralization, I think we lost a little bit, probably more than a little bit. But
I do not agree with that. But let's discuss.
Let's
Love it. Go ahead.
I'm not sure it's because of the proof of stake mechanism, but more the how it's implemented on Ethereum. It's not about proof of work versus proof of stake, but more the Ethereum proof of stake mechanism. Like at least during this period, it incentivizes more centralization because you have three different properties. The first one, if you want to stake, you need to stake at least 32 Ethereum. So it's a little bit more difficult for most of users. Also, since the merge, it's non-liquid. That means when you stake, you can't withdraw. So it does not really incentivize staking for individuals. It's quite difficult to run a node, and there's three issues. It created some centralization to a few actors, such as Lido and some exchanges. If you have a look to the different validators, most of them are run by Lido or exchanges, and it's mostly because of there's different challenges that will be solved with Shanghai. But for now, if you have a look to the different validator, I think three actors are representing 65% of the funds at stake. And by the way, we are starting to see OFAC compliant blocks, which is quite high. So in terms of decentralization, I'm a little bit at least disappointed. What's your point, Marc?
So now we fight. Every good podcast has a little bit of debate. Otherwise, it's not fun. There's a few very good points provided by Chard that are completely true and that are stone cold fight. The fact that for now, when you stake, it's a one-way street. So you don't know when you can unstake. Some people will say, well, it's almost over because there's a very high probability it will happen in April. The staking withdrawal activation, so Shanghai upgrade, has been activated on the dev of multiple devnet at this point. Have been activated since 3 days on Sepolia, which is the second largest testnet on Ethereum, and it's expected during this month to be activated on Gurley, which is the main testnet of Ethereum. And so far so good, and there's good consensus within the community to think during the month of April, the withdrawal and Shanghai will be activated on the Ethereum mainnet. We never know because there's an history of not respecting the deadline on the Ethereum Foundation side of things. But it's true. Completely true. It's not liquid now, but we are getting closer and closer to that date. I think it will help decentralization because it was also a true fact that that entities are representing more than half of staking on Ethereum right now. So solo staker represents around 30 to 35% of validator on Ethereum at this point. The rest is Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, Lido. And Rocket Pool and other small others. What I can say about that is the first thing, I think the SEC is helping on this side of things because I think centralized exchange staking is maybe on the way out, given what happened with BUSD and Paxos recently, and many people are talking about CBE. I don't know about that, to be honest. I don't think the SEC will go to Coinbase for this kind of things, but there's one thing about that. But also, I want to remind everybody that Lido is more a technical standard than a centralized entity. So Lido is actually representing more than 30 different entities. So you can have Stakefish, you have actually Coinbase as a Lido validators, and all this data is public, so it can be monitored, and that's the point of decentralized blockchain, is that the public registry is distributed, so anybody can check that data. And the market share of Lido is actually going down because there's more alternatives that are even more decentralized. For example, Rocket Pool that allows, and that's another point, 32 ETH is a lot of money. It's around $50,000 when we register this podcast. $50,000 is a lot of money for a lot of people, and it's not accessible for many people. And Rocket Pool allows a mini pool of 16 ETH. So you can share your mini pool and create a node with 16 ETH. That's still $25,000. And they're going to release a new upgrade with 8 ETH this year. So it will make things more accessible. But in terms of security, you are securing the Ethereum blockchain. So you need to have something at stake. And it's a very well-known vector of attack with proof of stake network, the nothing at stake attack. If you don't have something stake, well, what is your incentive, to be honest? So it's never going to be zero. It's always going to be too much for some people, but there's a true.
What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think of like proof of stake mechanism and consensus of Ethereum compared to like the DPoS that you have on Cosmos, for instance?
I think it's more decentralized, the Ethereum version of thing, even if it's not perfect. And that was my last point, is that for the first time on Ethereum, you actually have an incentive now to run your own node. Because if you, I don't have own share of that company, but if you buy a dApp node device, you buy that, you plug that, and if you have enough it to run at least a mini pool, it will pay for itself in a few months through the staking revenue. So for the first time in blockchain history, usually when you have a Bitcoin node, and it's still the case today, it's because you love the ethos, you love decentralization, and you want to support the network. And except some Bitcoiner in Meetup that say thank you for your service, there's not really a reward for that. For the first time, Ethereum is the first blockchain that actually pays you to run your own node as a staker. And compared to what we call dedicated proof of stake blockchain that are usually focused on performance, the device, especially with, I talked about dApp node, which will cost you around $2,000, which is a lot of money, but it's a high performance device and a bit future proof. You have also Ethereum on ARM that will cost you $300 to $500. So it will always be too much for some people, but it's becoming more and more accessible, and you can have a full staking node on that. So I think it's still early. Staking on Ethereum is a few years old, in December 2020, and a few months old in production, and if I can call it that way. But I think with time, decentralization will only increase in Ethereum.
I think it's going to be interesting also to see when that amount of ETH is unlocked, how people will start behaving. And, definitely looking forward to that. We've spoken a lot about decentralization, but maybe let's move the conversation to scalability. And give us a little bit of a background on how different blockchains started, experimenting with scalability solutions. So, when it comes to scalability, multiple solutions were implemented by different blockchains in the past, from, increasing block sizes with BCH to creating side chains, layer twos, but none were completely able to solve the problem. Why is that?
Mostly because this is a difficult problem. Like there was no easy solution to that. We want scalability, decentralization, and security at the same time. That means the participants of the consensus need to verify the legitimacy of transaction for security. They need to process a lot of transaction per second that potentially requires a lot of power. And they need to synchronize the consensus to maintain the overall consistency of the state. It's difficult to do that. Like if the work to be performed by validators is big, it becomes very difficult and expensive to run a validator or a miner. If you think about proof of work, so it will favor centralization. The network might be unstable, and I have like a Solana example in mind. Running a Solana node is very costly. Thus, there are very few nodes, and maintaining the consensus is quite unstable. And because, as we can see, the network is regularly down. So Solana was completely focusing everything on performance and scalability, but the trade-off was no decentralization at all, and even more than that, the network is very unstable. Increasing block size is a similar issue. At the end, you will need to process more transactions per second, so it will be more difficult for a validator to validate the chain. If you take Bitcoin trade-off, it really favors decentralization. It's possible to run a node on a Raspberry Pi, and today we have 15,000 nodes up and running. So this is the Bitcoin situation, but it has a very, very low throughput. Like it's 7 transactions per second. So there was also the possibility of creating like side chains, and I think it's quite good option actually. Like if you have a look if you have a look at Cosmos ecosystem with the native IBC, so that means you have a native way to create communication between different chains, and this is often a challenge. That's why we are trying to build blockchain bridges, and it's often a fail, unfortunately. But if you have, when I say fail, that means like they are often hacked and people are losing a lot of money. But if you have like at the blockchain level a way to implement cross-chain communication, it's very valuable. So this is something you have in the Cosmos ecosystem with the different sidechain and IBC. I also think DPoS is a quite interesting idea. Again, this is a different trade-off if you consider this against the Ethereum one. Also, the IBC might become a SPOF, a single point of failure. So again, different trade-off. But I think it remains a good idea. And for me, I think a good trade-off will be the following: like having a strong L1, which is really focused on like security and decentralization, and not that much on scalability, and which is only focused on settlement. Like transaction will be expensive, but this is not a big deal because we will factor this price on L2. I think this is, as of today, I think this is the most promising idea, and this is where the industry is going, by the way.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. It's the Bitcoin vision, by the way. So the idea of having a settlement layer with high value and high added value transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then layer 2 with Lightning Network in the case of Bitcoin. And Ethereum took that path as well with many different implementation of layer 2. So you have like optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, ZK AVMs, and so on. And I think it's the right approach, but there's always going to be experimentation on layer ones, because when you experiment on your own layer one, you can raise money and do ICOs and launch your stuff. And it's the same story since Litecoin in 2011. Litecoin was exactly the same code than Bitcoin, but instead of 10-minute block time, it was 2.5-minute block time, and faster and cheaper. And we have the same story for the past almost 10 years. At the end, Bitcoin was right. Like settlement layer, scalability layers, and Bitcoin and Ethereum took that path, and so far so good.
I mean, you used a lot of different terms there that I'd love us to unpack together. So, that solution that, or the solutions that Ethereum is aiming for is mainly rollups. There are a variety of different kinds of rollups, and also sharding that we've mentioned at the beginning of the episode. So how's that any different from a layer 2 in terms of like thinking about like Arbitrum or Polygon? And what are the advantages and challenges of each of them? Maybe we can start with sharding, and then we might move to rollups right after. Charles, you wanna take sharding?
Yeah, definitely. So the idea of sharding is to take your blockchain and split it into several smaller chains, and to implement a local consensus. Like this is a basic divide and conquer strategy. When you do computer science, this is a very well-known strategy. And then the big question is, how do you secure like this local consensus? So it's not a trivial one. And for instance, you can't really use a proof of work to do that, because if you do that, that means like, let's say you cut your blockchain into 1,000 smaller blockchain, and you continue with proof of work. That means that you will divide your proof of work power into 1,000. That means the 51% problem is not a 51% problem. It's 0.5%. If you have 0.5% of the overall power, you can take over one shard. So this is something that doesn't work. That's why it's important to move to proof of stake in this kind of situation. And then, so let's say there's different shards that run autonomously with different consensus. At some point, you will need to have some cross-shard communication because otherwise you don't have one blockchain, but you have a separate blockchain that can communicate. So this is not what we want. So we want to be able to maintain an overall state for the different shards. And you come up with a difficult question, because how do you manage this communication? It's not trivial at all. And by the way, if all the shards needs to communicate with each other all the time, you end up with a slower consensus than the whole blockchain. So this is something quite difficult. It's difficult already if you only consider like a simple native transaction, but if you start to consider like dApps, like you start to consider a swap dApp running on one shard, how does it communicate with another liquidity pool on another shard? Frankly, this is a completely very, very difficult problem, and I think that's why we started to remove this idea from the Ethereum roadmap. And
you're completely right. I think DeFi killed sharding on Ethereum because you cannot have Aave on one shard and Uniswap on the other shard. So you end up with the DeFi shard, which is the main shard that everybody wants to be there. And so you have one shard with everything and all the other shard with nothing. So what's the point of sharding? So we basically, with DeFi, killed the sharding roadmap of Ethereum, I think.
And the remaining part of sharding is in Ethereum, the idea. Like today, if you want to store data on Ethereum, you will store it at the same space where you store smart contract and execution. So, and it's quite costly. So the idea is to separate data from program, let's say, and create another chain which is only to store data. And the only sharding idea that is remaining is dunk sharding. The idea is to have this layer of data and shard this data, and if the data is immutable and you don't have to have a cross shard communication, it's read only. It's very simple, and in this context that could be implemented. Mm-hmm. I'm not even sure it will happen, but this idea could remain in Ethereum roadmap.
So sharding is mainly about like dividing a blockchain into different subsets and then making sure that they talk to one another, and that the security of the main chain is actually the one doing the consensus, if I understand this correctly.
You explain always so better than me.
Yeah.
So efficient.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Marc, what about rollups? How is that any different from sharding?
I think Shard will be better for all the technicalities, but let's cut to the point. Rollups are basically anchoring. So you have your own layer, and you take a batch of a bunch of transactions. You have a sequencer actor. Right now, it's like it's actually a problem in my eyes in the Ethereum ecosystem, because all the sequencers are completely centralized at this point across Optimism, Arbitrum, Starknet. It's all the same shit at this point, and that's one of the big topic of 2023 and 2024 is that you decentralize this process, because this sequencer takes a batch of transaction in that rollups and anchor that in one big transaction on the L1, and basically you have economies of scales when you do that. And especially with proto-dark-sharding that is expected for the Paris update after the Shanghai upgrade, the Cancun upgrade, after the Shanghai upgrade, we expect to have like a times 100 reduction of the cost of using a rollup in the future.
So interesting. That's, about combining different transactions together, waiting till they're combined and then pushing them on the chain at once, so that you don't have to be doing it like all the time, which gives you like scalability in terms of like fees and also ability to put like different transactions together at once. So there are the variety of different ways actually to do these rollups. You have optimistic rollups, ZK rollups. I'm sure there are like 5 or 6 other
And basically,
rollups out there.
well, we can talk about the technicalities for hours, and if Shard wants to do it, obviously. But it all boils down to how do you reach finality with L1? How do you anchor and notarize the information from the L2 to the L1? So, and do you reach finality after a week and hope everything will be all right? Optimistic rollup? Do you generate zero knowledge proof to anchor whatever happened on your layer 2? And all these flavors are very interesting, but also very complex. And I have to say, I need painkillers if I dive too much into it for the headache.
Charles, give us the painkiller.
Or I will give the pain. I think the most interesting ones are really validity rollups. They are a little less advanced than optimistic rollups for now, but they are really interesting. So the idea is to say, okay, we will create another blockchain, let's say, that runs in somewhat decentralized way, but which is really faster, and we will create a world where we create plenty of transaction, plenty of complex operation, and we would like to ensure the state of this blockchain on the L1, on Ethereum blockchain. And we would like that the L1, Ethereum, would be like an arbiter, would be, okay, I agree, like this state is correct. Like all the transactions that has been done, executed, are completely legitimate. There was no one trying to spend money that he hasn't, like this kind of thing. And the idea to do that is to use zero knowledge proof. Zero knowledge proof is a cryptographic field that allows to do different things. At the beginning, the idea of zero knowledge proof is to prove properties without giving any information about this property. But in this context, it's not really used this way, not for this property. In this context, it's used because of the asymmetry of creating a proof and verifying a proof. Creating a proof of validity is something quite complex and that requires a lot of power, while verifying that a proof is valid is very simple. So the idea is the following. We are creating a world, L2, where there are simple transaction rules, and we have a sequencer or a prover that verifies that the new state of the blockchain is correct, complies with these rules, and it will simply issue a proof of this, a zero-knowledge proof of this, and send it to a smart contract which runs on Ethereum blockchain. And the smart contract is only in charge of verifying the validity of the proof. And as this verification is quite cheap in terms of power, it's also cheap in terms of gas for Ethereum. And that means that we can factor all the transaction complexity into simply verifying the validity of the proof. So this is quite amazing when you think about that. And the Ethereum blockchain has simply no idea on what's going on the L2. It simply knows that this proof is valid and the new state of like the L2 is correct, and there was no one trying to spend money that he hasn't. So this is the idea. And then with this comes like new problem. Like for instance, the data availability problem is quite interesting. You are an observer, and you can be sure simply watching the chain that the state of the L2 is correct, but you have no idea what is this state. So this is a little bit like we are playing chess. I play, you play, and like we are committing proof that our moves are correct, legitimate. The Ethereum blockchain verifies that that our proofs are correct. So the Ethereum blockchain knows how many moves we played. It can know that our moves are completely legitimate, but it has no idea what's the position of the board. So this is a little bit scary. So we would like to have a way to build to rebuild this state for anyone observing the situation. And that's where we will use like proto-dunk sharding and this layer of data, which is on Ethereum chain, in order to be able to reconstruct this state. Well, it was a little bit
no, it's very
long,
interesting.
but I tried to explain everything.
No, very, very interesting. Like the variety of different solutions that are currently being implemented in order to solve like scalability. And then when you deep dive into rollups and you kind of understand that there are a variety of different pieces to it, it starts making sense because every single one of the pieces is trying to solve something that the other one isn't solving. So the question is that, you know, at the end of the day, there is no one size fits all solution. It feels like all of these things need to come together in some way or another in order for this to work. So how do you see these innovations coming together in order to solve scalability in the future? Talking about, you know, layer twos, sharding, rollups. We have a variety of different projects out there that are currently, you know, making waves, you know, namely Starknet, for instance. So how do you see that evolving and where do you think is the unlock?
I think one thing that is extremely important in the Ethereum ecosystem, and I will say Ethereum culture or EVM culture, Ethereum virtual machine, so the Ethereum technology, even if it's not the Ethereum network directly or layer 2 directly on Ethereum, is that we are not a cult compared to other ecosystem and communities. So anybody can try stuff, and it's pretty open. Use the technology, use the code, write your stuff. There's really a culture of let's move fast and break things on the Ethereum ecosystem for the better and the worst. If you go to rect.news, you will see the worst, but there's also a good innovation. And what I'm sure is that we're going to try everything. A lot of things will fail, but because we're going to try everything, we're going to find pretty good things. And that's the difference. Like, on Bitcoin, you have Lightning Network, you have one solution and very few other solutions, even if there's a bit of change on that side of things, and that's a pretty good news in my eyes. But on Ethereum, you have Optimism, which is trying their own stuff. You have Coinbase Logic Based, which is trying their own version of Optimism. You have Arbitrum, you have Scroll, you have ZK Sync, you have ZK EVM, you have Starknet, and so on, Metis, and so on and so on. And everybody will try their own flavor. Most of them will fail, that's for sure. But I think in 2 years, it will be much better than now. Just like 2 years ago was much worse than today.
Totally agree with what Marc said. I think it is going to be very, very interesting, and we are going to having a strong layer one and trying to implement some interesting stuff on layer two. There are plenty of new ideas, plenty of builders, and we are in the building time, so it's really, really exciting. Difficult to know which one will win at the end. And even if the winners is already there, we don't know. I guess there will be several winners. I guess also layer two will be able to settle not only on one layer one, but maybe on several layer one. This is another interesting idea. And I think the one challenge that will come with this layer two is also the challenge of centralization and decentralization. Who is the prover? Is it censorship resistant and so on? We are coming with the same problem that we have on layer one, on layer two. It's slightly less important because if you are unhappy with the censorship resistance of the layer two, you can go back to the layer one with your assets, and that's it. And by the way, this is an important thing. Like you must have some native way to go from your layer one to your layer two in terms of asset. This is something important.
Yeah, but I really want to emphasize that to the people that listen to us or watch us. As of today, every single layer 2 solution on Ethereum is completely centralized. And everybody telling you the opposite is not telling you the truth. And that's a huge problem. That's not something that is acceptable. That is something that we are working with right now because the technology is immature. But to be honest, I'm not comfortable. Like, I love the Optimism network. I do stuff there. I love Arbitrum. I love the upcoming ZK VM of Polygon and so on and so forth. But right now they are all completely centralized, and we need to fix that. And it will be an interesting development for the next and challenge for the next 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, looking at the future and before we wrap up, you were talking earlier, Mark, about Paris upgrade. Today we have Shanghai. In your opinion, both of your opinions, what are the Ethereum upgrades or implementations that you're most excited about in the future? And maybe give a quick explanation of what they are.
You want the Splurge, the Verge, and so on. To be honest, I'm maybe getting old, but in my point of view, once we have 48, 44 and Shanghai upgrades, we have almost everything we need. Like the other stuff are bonus in my eyes. So for example, the Verge implement the Verge, which change the way gas is calculated on Ethereum and will bring a fair amount of scalability and also the ability to limit the blockchain size growth over time. And that's quite important for decentralization because we don't want we want the most amount of nodes, so it's important to not have a blockchain that grow too fast in terms of size. But all this stuff are bonus, and the result of the continuous innovation of the Ethereum ecosystem and the openness, the open-mindedness of the Ethereum ecosystem to innovation. But I think I have the feeling maybe it's a boomer reaction, but the most important stuff will happen this year, and the rest is a bonus.
Charles, when you say this year, you mean in 2023?
Yeah.
Do you take into account the delays?
Well, on paper.
Yeah, okay. No. I'm kidding. No, I totally agree. Shanghai is somewhat important because it's really, really awaited, and it won't change everything, but we need it, and we need to have it. And also it can be interesting what will happen on the market because it can create more liquidity. On the other side, some users who were reluctant to stake because of the lock and the uncertainty of the locking time, maybe they won't hesitate anymore. So it's quite interesting what will happen. It's a local thing, we'll see. And as Marc said, I think the important one is the Protodonk Sharding upgrade, 1448, and this one is for Paris update. You mentioned.
So it's Cancun. So just to know, the Ethereum hard fork adopted the naming system of the DEFCON. So basically, Shanghai was DEFCON 2, as we said at the beginning of the podcast. DEFCON 3 is Cancun. DEFCON 4 is Prague. DEFCON 5 is Osaka. So now if you are listening to us, you know the name of the next upgrade for 2024 and 2025 probably.
Around the world with Ethereum. Gentlemen, that was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Appreciate the conversation and looking forward to, future Ethereum rabbit holes with y'all.
Cool. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. That was great.
That's it. It's always immensely enriching to dive into the development of a vibrant ecosystem such as Ethereum. One lesson that we can take away is that challenges always lead to innovation and that we're just getting started here. I hope that this leaves you with some brain material to digest. On the Ledger will be back soon with some of your favorite content. In the meantime, stay safe, take care, au revoir. This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.